A 3-year-old boy is in the hospital fighting for his life after alleged abuse at the hands of his mom's boyfriend. But that boyfriend is not the only alleged monster in this story. We have new information about why the boy's mom is facing charges, and wow, the text messages she allegedly sent her son's accused abuser for weeks before this boy would be sent to the hospital with injuries doctors say are all over his body and in his brain. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Before we get into this episode of On the Case, one of the most watched shows on YouTube, I need to talk about our partner and sponsor, truthfinder.com. Here at Law&Crime, we use Truthfinder to learn more information about the people who are involved in our stories. But even if you don't work in true crime, it can be a great tool to help give you some peace of mind, as it's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And with the paid subscription service, you get access to unlimited reports about almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/OTC. Stay informed, stay safe, check public records with Truthfinder now at www.truthfinder.com/OTC. It is beyond me how a mom could be accused of what a mom in Texas is accused of doing. Not just knowing about alleged abuse of her 3-year-old son, but allegedly letting it happen. And just wait until I show you the text messages that Chelsea Berg allegedly sent her boyfriend that were just uncovered by police in McKinney, Texas, which is outside of Dallas. Her son is reportedly now in the ICU. Now, before I get to those text messages, let me bring you up to speed on this story. This is Chelsea Berg. On social media, she frankly seems like the last person you would expect to face charges connected to the alleged child abuse of her son. And this is her son, Dawson Zamora. He's a young boy, just 3 years old. He has a huge smile. It appears that Dawson lived at least part of the time with his mom, Chelsea Berg. Dawson's parents are divorced. His dad says he's now in the ICU with brain damage because of what happened. In fact, his dad wrote on Facebook, quote, "He was pronounced dead by the time the medical professionals could get to him. No one knows the full amount of time he was deceased because he was driven to the hospital by his abuser after being beaten and the police were not called," end quote. Now, he says that Dawson was able to be brought back to life at the hospital, but he is still in very rough shape. He says that the right side of Dawson's brain is unresponsive. Now, this is the man who allegedly beat Dawson. His name is Christopher Alexander. He is the boyfriend of Chelsea Berg. It is unclear how long Berg and Alexander were dating. Court documents obtained by Fox 4 in Dallas show that on October 14th, Alexander took young Dawson to the hospital, allegedly claiming that Dawson had a fall at home. Alexander told his girlfriend Chelsea that he heard a loud thud in the house. Chelsea reportedly told police that she left Dawson with her boyfriend around 7:20 that morning. Then, shortly after, Alexander sent her a text about Dawson eating lunch. All was normal, right? Well, then Alexander called Berg after that, saying that he was rushing that boy to the hospital. Documents obtained by the TV station say that when Berg got to the hospital, Alexander told the story that he was in the other room at home and he heard a loud thud, but he didn't share any more than that. So that definitely sounds suspicious. Then at the hospital, Alexander reportedly got an attorney and stopped talking to police about what happened. Hospital staff reportedly said that Chelsea's son's injuries were far more severe than the fall that Alexander was claiming happened. Dawson's injuries include bleeding in the brain, bruising in various states of healing over his entire body, wounds to his chest and stomach, and even anal trauma. Now, Berg told investigators that her boy did not have those injuries when she left him in the care of her boyfriend that morning. And the new information that we are getting in this case make that an alleged lie, according to police, and I'll have more on that in a moment. 2 days after Dawson was rushed to the hospital, the man that his mom reportedly left him in the care of, Christopher Alexander, was arrested. He's currently facing charges of injury to a child, stalking, and tampering and fabricating evidence. He's being held on $210,000 bond. We'll have more on his criminal record in just a moment. It's serious, and it's important to how this case could play out. Now, on the same day that the boyfriend was arrested, the mom, Chelsea Berg, Dawson's mom, was also arrested. This is her mugshot. KFDA TV says that she was arrested on a charge of injury to a child by omission. She bonded out of jail that day. Her bond was set at $100,000. Now, we can see in online court records that her attorney filed a motion to change her bond. Fox 4 says that was so she could say goodbye to her son. Now, at the time of this reporting, it is believed that Dawson is still alive, but again, in very rough shape in the hospital. Berg was reportedly told that Dawson did not have any brain activity. Her bond conditions originally had restricted her from having contact with her son, which is why her lawyer wanted that to change. Now, it was unclear what evidence police had on Berg to say that she was aware of the alleged abuse of her son until now. KFDA TV reports that police searched Berg and Alexander's cell phones and they found some shocking text messages. Texts that go back multiple weeks leading up to October 14th, the day of the abuse that allegedly put her son in the hospital. There's one text on September 9th that reportedly says, quote, "He clearly hit his head when he fell. He has a bruise on his eyebrow and his whole jawline/cheek is bruised. You're reckless. He had progressively been getting more and more hurt with you. Leave me alone. I'm not blind. You're dangerous." That is what Chelsea Berg allegedly texted her boyfriend. Just a reminder, in October, she would leave that boy alone with Alexander, who then allegedly beat him, putting him in the hospital. There's another text message that Berg sent Alexander. This one was on September 18th, so a little less than a month before the abuse that put Dawson in the hospital. Berg allegedly texts her boyfriend, quote, "100,000% serious. You bruise him, hurt him, and cause damage every single time you are alone with him. There hasn't been a single time you've been alone with him where he hasn't been hurt." Just a reminder that Berg would leave that boy alone with the man who she wrote that to weeks later. In Texas, child abuse by omission does carry some serious prison time. If found guilty, Chelsea Berg could receive 5 years to life in prison. Not only did she seem aware that her boyfriend was allegedly abusing her son, she allowed him to be around that boy alone after that. Alexander also has an alleged violent past. Alexander previously was convicted of theft and unlawful restraint, and he's also facing a stalking charge related to a separate case. Now, Dawson's dad took to Facebook and he claims that Berg knew that Alexander had a serious criminal past, that he was wearing an ankle monitor, and that he is facing accusations in a serious stalking case. We did see that Berg's ex-husband filed for a temporary restraining order per Collin County court records, and there's a hearing for that next month as their son is fighting for his life in the hospital. Joining us now once again to talk about this case is Nima Rahmani, former federal prosecutor and president of West Coast Trial Lawyers. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. The last time we talked about this, which was just a couple of days ago, the big question I think was, what evidence does law enforcement have to prove that Chelsea Berg knew about the alleged abuse happening to her son? Now these text messages come out. What was your response when you saw those texts?
Chris, this is the proverbial smoking gun evidence, right? You got to get inside a criminal's mind, and Chelsea Berg is a criminal, and not because she necessarily did something, but she failed to do something, and that's protect her child. And at least a month earlier, going back to early September, there are text messages where Berg is texting Alexander, acknowledging that Alexander is abusing her son. I mean, it's that simple. So it really doesn't get better than this if you're law enforcement. Obviously, you want a signed videotape confession, but short of that, this is how you can get inside a criminal's mind and prove that knowledge.
She's charged with child abuse by omission. And when you read these text messages, that seems to be exactly what this is. What can be her defense, knowing that prosecutors have the text proving that she is talking about abuse almost a month before her son ends up in the hospital?
This is going to be a very difficult case for Berg to defend. And even Alexandra, I think Alexandra would probably try to point the finger at Berg, but now with these text messages, it's clear what's happening here. Alexander's the abuser, and Berg is standing by, allowing it to happen over the span of months. Really, most cases plead. I expect this case to plead out as well, even though they're both looking at very significant time under state law. Because there's no real defense here. How can you possibly argue that you didn't have knowledge when these text messages show you did. And really the only question is, does their son survive? And is this elevated to a potential murder case?
That was going to be my next question before we talk about plea deals and how that could factor in and how prosecutors could try and get leverage over one or the other with Berg and Alexander. But as we're recording this right now, Dawson, the young boy, according to his family, is still in the hospital. He's in very rough shape. You hope he's able to make a recovery. If he doesn't, how does that impact the charges? Clearly for Alexander, that's a murder charge that he would be faced with. But as far as Berg facing child abuse by omission, how could her son's passing impact the charges she faces?
I think you're right. I mean, it's clearly going to be a murder case against Alexander. And as we discussed last time, sadly, it seems like it may head in that direction if you believe Berg's lawyer that she wanted to have the opportunity to say goodbye to Dawson. I don't think it necessarily changes the case against Berg, but obviously it increases her potential exposure. It's still a potential life case because of the severity of the abuse, a 5 to life or 5 to 99 years, I believe, under Texas state law. So she's still looking at that amount. You can't be charged with murder by omission. Murder does require some sort of specific intent to kill, intent to inflict serious bodily injury. You can get murder if you show a deliberate indifference to human life. That's typically, playing Russian roulette or something like that. I think potentially the prosecution could argue that Berg's actions really constitute a deliberate indifference to human life, that depraved heart murder. Going to be difficult, I think, to prove based on an omission, though, that you can get to murder. I think what we would likely see is murder charges against Alexander and just an increased potential sentence on the child neglect for Berg.
For Berg, and I think often in some of these where you have two people who are accused of a crime, and one might argue that they were not the aggressor in this relationship, the other person called the shots, and they just followed orders. Maybe there was a domestic abuse that she can bring up in court. I don't know about that. But then it's like you look at this text. I have it here from September 18th, and she texts Alexander allegedly, 100,000% serious. You bruise him, hurt him, and cause damage every single time you are alone with him. There hasn't been a single time you've been alone with him where he hasn't been hurt. If you're a defense attorney and you see that, I mean, it feels like even that argument that Alexander was the dangerous guy calling the shots, it makes it really hard to seem like she was unaware of any of this that was going on.
It's really hard. And, fortunately, I don't do any defense work. I mean, if I did, I would have to try to put on some sort of mitigation package saying that she was also abused physically, emotionally, maybe even sexually, who knows, right? This is all sort of speculation here, but you would have to argue that she too is a victim and therefore is entitled to some consideration. Again, I'm not saying that's a very compelling argument, certainly not a good one from a legal perspective. That's not a legal defense. Just because you're a victim doesn't mean you can allow your child to be victimized. But maybe whether it's leniency from the prosecutor or the judge, that's really probably the only way to play this case. You can't certainly defend it straight up because the case is not defensible.
And if it comes down to plea deals, and Alexander certainly, I mean, if he is the one who did this and abused a child multiple times, he's the person that you would want to get. But then at the same time, you have this mom who knew that this abuse was going on, allowed it to happen, lied allegedly to doctors when she said, I have no idea how he was able to get these bruises, even though the bruises had been there for a period of time, according to doctors. How do you get a plea deal where she is being punished significantly, where it doesn't feel like she's getting off, but then at the same time she could provide information to get Alexander, hopefully it's not a murder case, but even if it goes there, if not some serious prison time to keep him off the streets?
Yeah, no question. Well, look, I mean, I still think her cooperation is important. Let's not forget the text messages can be used against her, right, in her case. But you probably need her testimony in Alexander's case. I'm not saying it's absolutely necessary, but obviously if you can wrap this up nicely in a bow, put Alexander away for life or close to it in what is really essentially a murder case, right? And baby Dawson is either going to pass or he's going to suffer lifelong brain injuries. I don't know if he's ever going to recover from this. And she gets double-digit years in prison. I think that's probably the just result. I don't know if it's, a 10-year case or 20-year case. I don't necessarily think Berg deserves life like Alexander does, but I think that's how you want to package this if you are the prosecution in this case.
If you're the prosecution and you know you have her pretty locked down, that if this went to, it feels like this would be a one-day trial, you show the text messages, child abuse by omission, and it's over, who makes the first call to make a deal? Especially if you're working a case against Alexander and you would like that leverage. But then I see if you're her defense attorney and you want to get something that can limit the amount of punishment she would have to go to prison, they would want to make the phone call. Take us inside how that typically works.
Yeah, usually the prosecution offers a deal to the less culpable individual. Certainly, if I was the defense attorney, I would be asking for some sort of deal and offering that cooperation, that bargaining chip. Again, not saying that the state necessarily needs it to convict Alexander, but it certainly makes it a lot easier. And it does show the acceptance of responsibility, the remorse. At the end of the day, she's a mother. It does appear that she loved her child based on the text messages, even though she was allowing him to be physically abused. She wants to say goodbye to him. So, again, very difficult to put on some sort of mitigation case, but certainly you would try to portray your client as being a mother who lost her child, who wants to accept responsibility, who wants to plead guilty, who wants to cooperate. It certainly will not bring her son back, but at least can get him the justice he deserves, and maybe that could potentially shave some time off her sentence.
And as far as Dawson now, this young boy, he's in the hospital. I know his dad and family members on that side of the family have been posting updates. They have a GoFundMe page that's raised, more than $40,000 last time I checked. And they give an update that his brain was not responsive in certain areas. And that may come to a terrible decision that parents have to make. I know the dad has said that he has custody of Dawson now. What type of power could Berg have in making any sort of decision about, I hate to say like end of life care, but making that decision that you would never want a parent to make?
Yeah, we talked about it briefly last time, but I think what I would expect now that these text messages are there, that Berg's parental rights would be terminated, which would mean that it's like she never had the child. So she won't be able to make any decisions for Dawson. It will be his biological father alone who will decide whether to provide end-of-life care or even, stop life support. Because it's really severe neglect. And it doesn't matter what state you're in. I'm in California, but Texas, most states have similar laws. If there's severe physical abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect, that is grounds to terminate parental rights without any reunification whatsoever. And the fact that she's going to spend many years in prison, I think a judge would move that case along pretty quickly.
How quickly could a judge terminate someone's parental rights? Because I know in cases of restraining orders that might take a hearing to hear both sides about it, to terminate someone's parental rights, as if in the eyes of the law, she never had the child. That's such a major decision. And I know she's facing major charges. What goes into that actually playing out?
Well, there is a hearing. Obviously, you have a right to due process. Most states, like at least here in California, you actually are given an attorney. It's the only time outside of a criminal case where the government will provide an attorney for you because it's such a fundamental right, your child. So I'm not quite familiar if that applies in Texas, but these are generally bench trials, so there's no jury. So it tends to move a lot faster than a jury trial. You don't have to go through jury selection and voir dire and that type of thing. So these cases tend to move quickly, especially if there's an emergency situation, which there is here, because again, you don't necessarily have that jury trial.
Another tough question here, just related to the 3-year-old Dawson who's in the hospital. When you have a case where someone's on life support and you don't know if this is going to be a murder case or not, how does that impact the timeline of how the court proceedings go on, whether you're dealing with an abuse case or in this case something that could become a murder?
Yeah, that's a great question. If there was no medical possibility that the person would survive, then you can certainly still argue that medical causation. But obviously, if the person is alive but brain dead on life support and you do pull the plug, the defense will be able to argue that it's not a homicide case. It's just a severe assault or abuse case because, again, the individual was still alive, albeit brain dead.
Clearly with these text messages, it ties, and perhaps Berg's testimony would tie him specifically to the abuse. But still, even though the boy has, according to doctors, bruises that are in various stages of healing, Alexander could say, I'm just the boyfriend. I'm not a guardian. I'm not a parent. I was in the house. She put the baby in my care. And a defense attorney could almost say, you have zero proof that he actually did any of this. How do you tie someone, and certainly the text messages will help, but how do you tie someone to an abuse like this when there's probably not video evidence of it happening?
Sure. The way you do it is to show that there's only two individuals who had access to the child, right? It was Berg or it was Alexander. And obviously Alexander's text messages show that it was Alexander. So obviously expect the defense to argue that these injuries happened at school or somewhere else, that it wasn't him, right? That's really the only possible defense here. But given the fact that Dawson died while in Alexander's care, that there's all these bruises, different parts of the body, different stages of healing, plus you have Berg's text messages and likely testimony, seems like a very, very strong case. I don't think any jury is going to believe that it was someone else and not Alexander that inflicted these injuries.
When it comes to child abuse cases and juries, because I could see for defense attorneys, it can be really tough to try and argue on behalf of your client, especially when you have people who would see, these text messages, and I know this case may not go to trial, but what are the type of juries that a defense attorney would be looking for in a case like this?
Very difficult. When you're talking about crimes upon children, it's going to be very hard to find any juror that's going to be sympathetic to this. I mean, these are very terrible cases. Even when I was a prosecutor, Chris, I hated these cases. Not to say they're not righteous. They are so disturbing. I would rather, handle human trafficking, drug cartel cases, right? Violence that, I can't even describe on the show, than to handle cases involving physical or sexual abuse of a child or child pornography. They're so disturbing that I can't imagine any jurors giving Alexander really any sympathy or consideration here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just, when I read these text messages for the first time, it was just it was just kind of this speechless moment of like, I cannot believe that this was going on, according to police, for as long as it was, and that there was this awareness that both of them had. Nima Rahmani, West Coast trial lawyers and former federal prosecutor, thank you, sir, as always, for being with us on Law and Crime. This is a really tough case, but we appreciate your time.
It really is. Thanks for having me, Chris.
Before we go, there is a GoFundMe for Dawson. It has already raised more than $40,000 as he is fighting for his life in the hospital. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.